What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Helen whispered to herself as she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring into the empty coffee cup in front of her. The morning sun spilled weakly through the thin curtains, casting long shadows on the cracked linoleum floor of her modest home in Cedar Falls, Iowa. The silence pressed in around her, heavier than the weight of her 73 years. The house felt too big, too quiet, like a museum of memories where she was the only visitor left wandering the halls. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the remote and flicked on the TV, hoping for distraction but finding only another reminder that the world was moving on without her. On the screen, a news anchor's voice broke the stillness, reporting Elon Musk's latest audacious plan, a crewed mission to Mars set to launch next year. Elon Musk is pushing the boundaries of what's possible, proving age and failure are just numbers and experiences on the road to success, the anchor said, his tone tinged with awe and disbelief. Helen's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. Elon Musk, she thought, a man who's never allowed fear or age to cage him in. She remembered the countless times she'd heard that name over the years, the relentless entrepreneur, the man who built rockets, electric cars, and dreamed of colonizing other planets. To Helen, he was a symbol of relentless reinvention, of daring to start over no matter the odds. And yet here she was, 73, feeling invisible, forgotten, and utterly stuck in the shadow of her own fading past. Her husband, Frank, had passed 2 years earlier, leaving an emptiness that swallowed the house whole. Her children, scattered across the country and busy with their own lives, called less and less, their voices distracted and rushed. The loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical ache she carried every morning when she woke to a quiet bed and an empty side of the pillow. She looked down at her hands again, hands that once molded dough for Sunday dinners, held the hands of nervous students in her classroom, and typed letters full of hope and promise. Now, those hands shook with the tremor of uncertainty and years of holding back tears. She thought about the doctor's last visit, the soft but firm words, "Helen, you need to slow down. Your heart isn't as strong as it used to be. Take it easy. Take it easy." How do you take it easy when every day feels like fading away? When the world tells you you're past your prime, past your use? Helen closed her eyes and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. What if she didn't have to fade? What if there was still a spark left to ignite inside her, just like Elon Musk's rockets that dared to break Earth's gravity? The idea was so foreign it almost scared her. She thought about the mornings when she used to get up early, energized and ready to face the day as a teacher. The classroom full of expectant eyes, the smell of chalk dust and old books, the sound of children's laughter echoing in the hallways. That Helen seemed like a lifetime ago. Now, she was a ghost in her own story, a spectator watching life pass by on the television screen. But that news clip about Elon Musk, that fearless vision, stirred something in her, a question, a challenge, a call. Is it really over? Or have I been hiding behind my own fears? She reached for her phone, the device she usually avoided, unsure where to begin. After fumbling with the screen, she found a video titled "Elon Musk on Failure, Fear, and Starting Over." She tapped play, and his voice filled the room, bold and unapologetic. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Those words hit her like a spark. Helen wiped a tear that slid down her cheek. Could she still do something important? Did her story still matter? Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope, the old fight stirring beneath the weariness. She whispered to herself again, what if everything I believed about getting old was wrong? Then, almost instinctively, she reached for her laptop, gathering dust on the corner of the kitchen counter. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. Could she try? Could she begin again, at 73? A small voice inside said yes. Somewhere beyond the walls of this lonely kitchen, beyond the doubts, the silence, the ache, the world was waiting. Helen took a deep breath and pressed the power button. The screen lit up, a blank page waiting for her first words, her first step. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The invitation echoed in her mind like a lifeline. It was time. Time to try again. Time to believe that the best chapters of her life might still be unwritten. As the sun climbed higher, the shadows in the kitchen receded, and Helen's eyes shone with a flicker of something long forgotten, hope. Helen sat back in her warm kitchen chair, the laptop glowing softly in front of her, but her mind wandered back through the years filled with laughter, loss, and lingering regrets. She remembered when she was younger, full of fire and purpose, a schoolteacher in Cedar Falls, beloved by her students for her warmth and patience. Back then, mornings were bright and full of possibility. She would wake before dawn, brew a strong pot of coffee, and prepare lessons with the kind of care that made each student feel seen. She was more than a teacher, she was a mentor, a friend, a guiding light. The classroom was her stage, and she thrived under the hum of chatter and learning. But as the years went by, the classroom grew quieter for her. Retirement came and took that identity away like a thief in the night. Without the daily bustle, Helen found herself untethered, drifting through empty days in the house she and Frank had shared for nearly 50 years. Frank, her husband, was her rock, the man who had loved her quietly and steadfastly, who had held her hand through illnesses and heartbreaks. His sudden death 2 years ago was like losing the sun in her sky. Their children, Michael and Susan, had once been the center of her world, but life's demands and distance had built walls she hadn't quite managed to scale. Phone calls grew infrequent, visits became rarer still. Helen understood, of course, they had their own lives, families, and responsibilities. Still, the silence stung. She sometimes sat by the window for hours, watching neighbors tend their gardens, children playing in yards, couples walking hand in hand. The feeling of being left behind settled deep into her bones. Regrets crept in like shadows. She thought of the dreams she once had, dreams of writing a novel, traveling beyond the Midwest, and making a mark on the world beyond her classroom. She had started a few stories here and there, notebooks filled with half-finished ideas tucked away in drawers, forgotten like so many parts of her younger self. She thought of the friendships that faded, the people she lost touch with over decades, sometimes through distance, sometimes through unspoken grievances. And then there was the aching loneliness, a hollow place inside that felt like it might never fill again. Yet beneath the weight of all this loss was a flicker of memory that refused to die. Helen closed her eyes and saw herself at 25, standing before a classroom full of eager faces. The sunlight streaming through tall windows, the scent of books and chalk dust thick in the air. The hope in her heart was palpable then, a fierce belief that she could change lives. She recalled a particular moment when a shy boy in her class, David, had looked up at her after struggling with his reading and said, "You believe in me, Miss Parker. That's why I want to try." It was a small victory but one that had stayed with her all these years. She had thought, back then, that those moments would be endless, that her influence would ripple through time like a stone dropped into a still pond. But life, as it always does, had its own plans. There had been struggles, her own health began to decline, the responsibilities of raising a family grew heavier, and the unexpected death of her mother left a wound she never quite healed. Over time, Helen found herself shrinking away from the world, retreating into a shell of quiet resignation. The energy and ambition that once burned bright were replaced by cautious routines and whispered doubts. And now, here she was, at 73, a woman who felt like a ghost in her own life. Yet, even as the years piled on and the shadows lengthened, that small flicker of her younger self, the teacher, the dreamer, refused to be extinguished. Helen reached out and ran her fingers over a dusty box on the shelf, pulling it down carefully. Inside were old notebooks filled with her stories, letters from former students, and faded photographs of family gatherings long past. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a picture of her and Frank at their wedding, young and full of hope. She smiled sadly, tracing the outline of their faces with a trembling finger. How did I let time steal so much from me, she wondered. The answer was complicated: life's slow erosion, fear of failure, the quiet voice of doubt that whispered she was too old to change, too tired to try again. But maybe, just maybe, that voice was wrong. Maybe age wasn't a prison but a new kind of freedom. Helen thought about the news clip she'd seen earlier, Elon Musk's fearless leap into the unknown. What if she could find that courage again? What if there was a way to rewrite her story, to reclaim parts of herself she thought lost? The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. She glanced at the clock and realized she'd spent hours lost in memory and reflection. A sudden pang of loneliness washed over her, sharp and raw. She reached for the phone and scrolled through her contacts, hesitating over her daughter Susan's name. It had been too long since they last spoke. Too long since Helen had reached out with anything other than a polite holiday card. But what would she say now? I'm trying to be brave, she thought. I'm trying to find a new beginning. The past wasn't something she could change, but the future, that was still unwritten. As she sat there, a sense of determination began to build, fragile but real. Helen knew it wouldn't be easy, change never was. But maybe the first step was simply to try. To take a page from Elon Musk's book and refuse to let fear dictate her life. The world outside her window was waiting. The possibility of a new chapter shimmered just beyond the horizon. And for the first time in a long time, Helen felt a quiet hope stirring in her heart. It was time to stop fading and start shining again. Helen felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach each morning as she faced the reality of her days. The silence of the house pressed down on her like a weight she couldn't lift. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her she was alone, and with every passing year, the world seemed to grow colder and less interested in her existence. Is it too late for me? The question haunted her constantly, a shadow lurking behind every thought. Her daughter Susan's words echoed in her mind from their last phone call, distant and distracted: "Mom, you need to think about moving to assisted living. It's safer. You can't keep living alone like this." The phrase stung more than Helen expected. She wasn't sure what frightened her more, the thought of losing her independence or the realization that those she loved thought she was slipping away. Then there was the doctor's advice during her last checkup. "Helen, your heart isn't as strong as it used to be. You need to slow down. No more late nights or stress. Just take it easy." Taking it easy sounded like surrender, a quiet admission that the fight was over. But Helen wasn't ready to surrender yet. She wrestled with the inner war of wanting to be safe and the desperate need to prove to herself she still mattered. Society's subtle dismissals, those glances that seemed to say, "She's past her prime," gnawed at her confidence. The world treated older people like relics, useful only as memories of the past. Helen hated feeling like an afterthought. One rainy afternoon, as the sky darkened and thunder rumbled softly, Helen sat curled on the couch scrolling through her phone, a habit she had reluctantly developed. News articles about the economy, politics, and obituaries flooded her feed. Then a notification caught her eye, a link to a podcast titled "Elon Musk, Why Failure Isn't the End." Curious, she tapped it, and soon Elon's voice filled the room. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," he said, his tone passionate and resolute. Helen felt a strange surge in her chest. She listened as Musk spoke about how he had faced bankruptcy, public ridicule, and personal setbacks, yet never stopped pushing forward. "Fear of failure will keep you from doing great things," Elon warned. "You have to be willing to take risks, to reinvent yourself constantly, no matter your age." The words echoed in Helen's mind long after the podcast ended. Could she really change? Did she have the strength to fight her own fears and doubts? Her mind flickered between hope and despair like a candle struggling against the wind. That night, as Helen lay awake in the quiet darkness, her thoughts raced. She recalled conversations with her neighbors, who often spoke about retirement as the end of life's meaningful moments. "You've done your part," they said kindly but with finality. But Helen wanted more. She wanted to feel alive again. Yet the voices inside her head fought back fiercely. You're too old. What can you possibly do now? Your family has moved on. You're alone. You don't have the energy or the health to start over. The war inside her was brutal. Each moment of hope was met with a wave of doubt. She imagined trying to reach out to her children, fearing their disappointment or impatience. She worried about embarrassing herself if she tried something new and failed. On top of that, her body betrayed her with aches and fatigue, reminders that time was not on her side. The next morning, Helen awoke feeling drained but determined to push through. She decided to call Susan, her hand shaking as she dialed. When her daughter answered, the warmth she'd hoped for was faint. "Mom, is everything okay?" Susan asked cautiously. Helen forced a smile into her voice. "I'm just thinking about some changes." "Like what?" Susan's tone was guarded, as if bracing for bad news. "Maybe I want to start something new. Write again. Maybe even share my stories." There was silence on the line, then Susan sighed softly. "Mom, it's great you want to try new things, but don't overdo it. You need to be realistic." Helen felt a pang of sadness but held on. "I know it's not easy, but I have to try." Their conversation ended with promises to talk again soon, but the cold distance lingered. Helen hung up feeling both rejected and strangely empowered. She realized that while others might doubt her, the fight had to come from within. That evening, Helen pulled out one of her old notebooks filled with half-written stories and memories. Her hands trembled as she opened it, but a spark flickered. She wasn't ready to give up on herself yet. Over the following days, Helen faced more tests. A neighbor stopped by, gently suggesting she join a senior center's activities. "It might help to get out and meet people," she said kindly. Helen smiled politely but felt a stubborn refusal rise within her. She wanted to do more than just get out. She wanted to reinvent, to challenge herself like Elon Musk challenged the impossible. One afternoon, Helen sat in the small living room, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. She scrolled through social media posts of Elon Musk speaking at conferences, launching rockets, and talking about Mars colonies. His energy, his refusal to accept limits, sparked a fire in her chest. If he can start new companies, build rockets, and think about colonizing planets at 50, 60, even 70 years old, she thought, why can't I start something small? Why can't I be brave? That night, she wrote down a single sentence on the blank page of her laptop: "I am ready to try again." It was the beginning of a battle not just against time and age but against the doubts that had shackled her for so long. Helen knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be moments of loneliness, fear, and failure. But she was learning to listen to a different voice now, a voice that whispered not, "You are too old," but, "You still matter." The inner war was far from over, but the first victory had been won. Helen had chosen hope. Helen woke the next morning with a strange new feeling, an ember of determination glowing faintly in her chest. She remembered Elon Musk's words from the podcast the other night, about doing something important even when the odds seemed stacked against you. That small but fierce spark pushed her forward as she moved through the quiet house, her footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floor. She walked over to the old bulletin board in the hallway, a relic from earlier years cluttered with faded notes and family photos. For the first time in months, she reached up and removed the clutter, making space for something new. Helen sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard of her laptop. The cursor blinked at her, expectant and blank. What do I even say, she wondered. The stories she once dreamed of writing felt buried beneath decades of fear and doubt. But she didn't want perfection. She just wanted to start. With a deep breath, Helen began to type. At 73, I thought it was over. I thought my time had passed, that the world had moved on without me. But today, I am choosing to try again. She paused and smiled, the words feeling both fragile and powerful. She decided to create a blog, a place to share her stories, her struggles, and her hopes. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there would read and understand. The act of opening a new document, naming it A New Beginning, felt like a quiet rebellion against the idea that her best days were behind her. The hours slipped away as Helen poured her memories, her feelings, her dreams onto the digital page. She wrote about her years as a teacher, the moments of joy and pain, the loss of Frank, the quiet battles with loneliness and self-doubt. She shared her fears of being invisible and her newfound desire to fight back. It was not polished or perfect, but it was real. When she finally clicked publish, her heart raced. Would anyone read it? Would anyone care? The next morning, Helen checked her email nervously. To her surprise, a few comments had already appeared, kind words from strangers, encouragement, and shared stories of their own struggles. One message stood out: "Your courage inspires me. Keep going." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Encouraged, Helen decided to take another small but bold step. She dug out her old camera from a dusty shelf and began walking around her neighborhood each day, capturing images of the world through her eyes: rusted farm equipment, golden fields, children playing at the park. Photography became a way for her to reconnect with the world and with herself. On one of these walks, Helen stopped at the local library and noticed a flyer for a community writing group meeting on Saturday afternoons. Her heart leapt, but doubt crept in quickly. Would anyone want to listen to someone her age, someone rusty from years of silence? Still, she decided to go. The group met in a cozy room filled with worn chairs and walls lined with books. Helen's nervousness melted as she listened to others share their stories, some young, some old, all searching for connection. When it was her turn, she shared a piece she'd written about losing Frank and finding hope again. The room fell silent, then filled with soft applause. A woman named Diane, a fellow retiree and writer, approached Helen afterward. "You've got a gift," Diane said warmly. "Don't let fear hold you back." Helen felt a warmth she hadn't known she missed, a sense of belonging, a reminder that she was not alone. Each day, she challenged herself in small ways. Writing a few paragraphs, taking a photo, reaching out to old friends. The physical act of moving, creating, and connecting ignited a new energy in her body and mind. One afternoon, while reading an interview with Elon Musk, Helen stumbled across a quote that resonated deeply: "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." That phrase echoed through her. Helen knew her alternative wasn't disaster, but fading away into silence. Change was her lifeline. She began sharing her blog posts on social media, tentatively at first, unsure if the world wanted to hear from someone her age. But the responses warmed her heart. People wrote from across the country, sharing how her words gave them courage to face their own fears, no matter their age. Helen's small garage, once cluttered with old tools and forgotten boxes, became her creative sanctuary. She set up a desk by the window and surrounded herself with photos, notebooks, and prints of her photographs. This space, filled with light and possibility, was where she rediscovered herself. Yet, not every day was easy. Some mornings, Helen battled the urge to give up, the voices of doubt crashing like waves against her fragile hope. Sometimes her hands shook too much to write, or her body ached so badly that getting out of bed felt impossible. But each time, she thought of Elon Musk, launching rockets despite the risks, rebuilding companies after failures, defying what others said was possible. She whispered to herself, "If he can do it, so can I." One Sunday afternoon, Helen received an unexpected message from her son Michael. "Mom, I've been following your blog. I'm proud of you." The words were simple but carried a weight she hadn't dared to hope for. That evening, Helen sat by the window, looking out at the fading light. The house no longer felt empty. It hummed with possibility, with the quiet power of someone who had chosen to try again. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. Helen thought back to the moment she first heard Elon Musk's words and realized how much they had changed her. The spark that seemed so small had grown into a flame. At 73, she was no longer invisible. She was a woman on a journey of hope, courage, and transformation. And this was only the beginning. Helen's life was no longer a quiet retreat into the shadows. After months of small steps and tentative hope, something extraordinary began to unfold. One evening, as she refreshed her blog page, she noticed a notification that stopped her breath, a message from a stranger, a reader who said, "Your story moved me more than you know. I shared it with my book club, and now we want to hear more." That night, Helen sat at her desk, the glow of the laptop illuminating her face, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The realization hit her. Her words were reaching beyond the small circles she imagined. They were touching real people, sparking real conversations. The next morning, a comment from Susan popped up under one of her posts, "Mom, I'm sorry I doubted you. I see now how brave you are. I want to talk." Helen's throat tightened with emotion. It was the first olive branch in years, a fragile but precious connection rekindling after silence and distance. She responded cautiously but with hope, setting the stage for conversations that would slowly rebuild the bridges between them. Encouraged by the momentum, Helen decided to push further. She submitted an essay to a local newspaper, a heartfelt piece about aging, resilience, and the unexpected gifts of starting over. Weeks passed without a reply, and doubt crept back in. Then one afternoon, Helen received a phone call from the editor. "Helen, your essay touched us all. We want to publish it in next week's issue." When the paper hit the stands, Helen's phone began to buzz relentlessly. Messages flooded in, from old friends, former students, even people she had never met. Some shared their own stories of struggle and hope. Others simply thanked her for reminding them they weren't alone. Helen felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she read the messages, overwhelmed by the sheer outpouring of connection and kindness. The story of a 73-year-old woman finding new purpose struck a chord across generations. Buoyed by this breakthrough, Helen started a weekly video journal, speaking directly to her growing audience. At first, she fumbled with the camera, self-conscious about her wrinkles and trembling hands. But as she spoke from the heart, her authenticity shone through. People responded with warmth and encouragement, calling her their inspiration. The act of sharing her vulnerabilities became a powerful source of strength. Meanwhile, her relationship with Susan began to thaw. They talked on the phone more often, sometimes for hours, sharing memories and hopes. Helen learned about Susan's struggles as a single mother, her fears, and regrets. And Susan, in turn, listened to Helen's newfound courage and vision. The emotional barriers that had built up over years started to crumble. Helen's son Michael surprised her with a visit one weekend, carrying a box of old family photos. Together, they laughed, cried, and reminisced. Michael confessed he hadn't realized how much his mother had kept inside. Their bond grew deeper, healing old wounds. One afternoon, Helen received an invitation to speak at a local senior center's event on aging and creativity. Nervous but resolute, she prepared a short talk about her journey, her fears, and the courage to begin again. Standing before the audience, Helen felt her heart race, but she spoke with clarity and passion. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several people approached her afterward, eager to share their own stories and thank her for the inspiration. Helen realized she was no longer just writing about transformation, she was living it, helping others find their own sparks of hope. Her garage studio flourished. She printed her photographs, framed them, and started selling a few at local art fairs. The money was small but symbolic, a tangible sign of her new chapter. Helen's physical health improved too. Encouraged by her growing energy, she began walking daily, sometimes exploring new trails beyond her neighborhood. The rhythm of movement, the fresh air, and the changing scenery lifted her spirits. She noticed that the aches and stiffness lessened, and with each step, she felt more alive. But breaking through wasn't without setbacks. One winter evening, Helen fell on the icy sidewalk and fractured her wrist. The pain and frustration threatened to undo her progress. For days, she wrestled with despair. But then she remembered Elon Musk's persistence, how he had faced failure and kept moving forward. Helen refused to let this accident define her. With the help of friends and her children, she recovered, adjusting her writing and photography to accommodate her healing hand. This challenge became another chapter in her story of resilience. Through it all, Helen kept reminding herself that age was not a limitation but a lens through which she could see the world differently. Her experiences, her struggles, and her wisdom gave her a unique voice, a voice that resonated deeply with others. One evening, as she sat in her favorite chair with a cup of tea, Helen reflected on how far she had come. The woman who once felt invisible and forgotten had become a beacon of hope, not just for herself but for many others who believed they were too old to change. She whispered softly, "I was never too old. I just needed permission to matter again." And with that, Helen smiled, knowing her journey was far from over. It was a new beginning, full of promise, courage, and the endless possibility of transformation. Helen sat quietly in her sunlit kitchen, the soft hum of the morning filling the space as she sipped her coffee. The house, once so empty and cold, now felt alive with possibility and purpose. Her journey, one she never imagined she would take, had transformed more than just her days. It had reshaped her very sense of self. She thought back to the woman she had been at 73, cautious, uncertain, wrestling with doubt and loneliness. That woman seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who had learned to embrace change, risk, and hope. Helen understood something profound: aging was not the end. It was another chapter, rich with lessons, growth, and the chance to rewrite the story of her life. She had spent so long believing the lie that time had run out, that her contributions no longer mattered. But now she knew better. She was living proof that transformation was possible at any age. Her blog, her photography, and her connections with people near and far had woven a new tapestry of meaning. The words she wrote, the photos she took, the stories she shared, they created ripples far beyond her small town. Her children's renewed respect and the friendships she rebuilt brought healing to old wounds. One afternoon, Helen received a letter from a young woman in California who said Helen's story had inspired her to pursue a long-delayed dream of going back to school. Another email came from a veteran in Texas who wrote that Helen's courage gave him the strength to fight addiction. These messages filled Helen's heart with a deep sense of purpose. She realized her legacy was not about wealth or accolades but about the impact one life can have when it refuses to fade quietly away. Helen began volunteering at the local community center, leading a creative writing workshop for seniors. She watched as others, hesitant at first, found their voices and stories again. Their laughter and tears were a testament to the power of shared experience and the enduring strength of the human spirit. One chilly autumn evening, Helen sat beside the fireplace, holding a framed photo of Frank, her late husband. "You were right," she whispered softly. "It's not over. It's just the beginning." She reached for her laptop and began typing a new post, one that would capture her journey from despair to hope, from silence to voice. "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." As she wrote, she thought of Elon Musk, the catalyst who had ignited the spark inside her. Not as a savior, but as a symbol of relentless courage, boundless curiosity, and the refusal to accept limits. Helen knew that the true transformation came from within, from the decision to try, to fight, to believe. She closed the laptop and looked around her home filled with memories, stories, and the vibrant energy of a life reclaimed. This was her new legacy, not a monument, but a living, breathing testament to the power of hope and action. Helen smiled, feeling a deep peace settle over her. The future was no longer something to fear but a canvas waiting for the brushstrokes of her choices. At 75, Helen had discovered the truth that so many hesitate to believe: it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. After Helen's story spread through her town and beyond, the ripples of change started to touch people in ways she hadn't imagined. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the quiet revolution happening in living rooms, senior centers, and kitchen tables across America, people who, like Helen, had felt forgotten but were now finding their voice again. One morning, as Helen was preparing breakfast, the phone rang. It was Diane, the woman from the writing group. "Helen, have you heard? The local library is organizing a Creativity After 60 festival. They want you to headline it." Helen's heart skipped. The festival would be a day dedicated to stories of reinvention, resilience, and hope, designed to inspire people who felt left behind by time. She accepted, though with nerves buzzing under her skin. The weeks before the event were a whirlwind of preparation. Helen wrote and rewrote her speech, eager to capture the essence of her journey and the spirit she wanted to share. She thought carefully about the words that could ignite others' courage, the same way Elon Musk's words had sparked hers. The day of the festival arrived bright and clear, the crisp fall air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. The community center buzzed with energy, tables lined with crafts, books, and photos, laughter and conversation filling every corner. Helen took the stage, looking out at a sea of faces, some hesitant, some eager, all searching for connection. She spoke honestly about fear, doubt, and the loneliness that can come with aging. But she also shared her triumphs, the small steps, the moments of courage, and the power of embracing change. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, but more than that, she saw tears and smiles, hands reaching out to hers. People came forward, sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. An elderly man named George told Helen he'd been too afraid to take up painting after his wife passed, but her story gave him the push he needed. A young woman caring for her aging father thanked Helen for reminding her that love and resilience can bridge generations. The festival became an annual event, growing each year, a beacon for anyone who felt that time had left them behind. Helen's role as a speaker and mentor grew, and she found deep fulfillment in helping others rewrite their stories. At home, Helen's blog blossomed into a community forum where readers shared their journeys and supported each other. The digital space was alive with encouragement, advice, and friendship, proving that age was no barrier to connection. One evening, Helen received a surprise invitation to speak at a regional conference on aging and innovation. The organizers wanted her to discuss how creativity and courage could transform later life. Nervous but honored, Helen prepared a keynote that wove together her personal story with a broader call to action. She spoke about how society's expectations often limit what older adults believe they can achieve. She challenged those ideas with examples of people who had dared to try again, emphasizing that transformation isn't reserved for youth. Helen's speech was met with standing ovations and invitations to collaborate on projects supporting senior empowerment. She began working with organizations dedicated to mental health, creative arts, and lifelong learning, eager to expand the impact of her message. Through all this, Helen remained grounded in her small-town routines, morning walks, coffee with friends, quiet evenings by the fire. She treasured the balance between public engagement and personal reflection. Her relationship with her children continued to heal and deepen, and Susan often joined her at writing group meetings, now a source of mutual support. Helen's photography also took on new meaning. She started a project called Faces of Renewal, capturing portraits of people who had embraced change later in life. Each photo told a story of courage and hope, highlighting the diverse ways people find purpose. The exhibit toured community centers, libraries, and galleries, touching hearts and shifting perceptions about aging. Helen found joy in hearing the stories behind each face and seeing the pride in those who had once felt invisible. Despite the growing attention, Helen remained humble and focused. She often thought about Elon Musk and his relentless drive to push boundaries. While she never sought fame or fortune, she understood the power of daring to defy expectations. Her journey had become a quiet rebellion against invisibility and despair. One afternoon, as Helen sat in her garage studio editing photos, a letter arrived from a university professor researching aging and creativity. He asked if he could interview her for a study on how personal transformation in later life affects well-being. Helen agreed, recognizing the opportunity to contribute to a deeper understanding of what she and so many others were living. The interview was a chance to reflect on how fear, courage, connection, and purpose intertwined in her story. She spoke candidly about the dark days when hope seemed distant, and the small decisions that led her toward light. Months later, the professor sent Helen a copy of the published paper. It highlighted how narratives like hers challenge societal stereotypes and empower others to envision new possibilities. Helen felt proud that her experience could influence change on a broader scale. One evening, after a long day filled with calls and emails, Helen stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky blazed with orange and pink, the world alive with color and promise. She breathed deeply, feeling gratitude for the journey, its trials, triumphs, and the unexpected beauty that had emerged. Helen knew that every choice, every word written, every connection made was part of a legacy that extended far beyond herself. It was a legacy of courage, resilience, and hope for anyone who might one day hear her story and think, if she can do it, so can I. She smiled softly, knowing that the ripples she had started would continue to spread, touching lives in ways she might never fully see. And in that truth, Helen found peace and purpose, her story forever entwined with the countless others rewriting what it means to grow older and live fully. Despite the growing momentum in her life, Helen knew the journey wasn't always smooth. Behind the bright moments were shadows she had to face, old fears, lingering regrets, and the harsh realities of aging that no amount of hope could erase. One morning, after a restless night filled with uneasy dreams, Helen woke with a heaviness in her chest. The ache in her joints was sharper, the stiffness more pronounced. She looked in the mirror and saw the lines etched deeper around her eyes and mouth, proof that time was still moving forward, relentless and indifferent. It was a reminder that no matter how much she fought, her body was not the same as it had been decades ago. The physical toll of aging was undeniable. That day, Helen found herself reluctant to get out of bed, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her spirit. The setbacks, the falls, the aches, the moments of forgetfulness, threatened to steal the progress she had made. She wondered if she was fooling herself, clinging to dreams that might be out of reach. Is it really possible to change at my age? She asked aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. In those moments, the voice of Elon Musk echoed in her mind, not as a cure, but as a challenge. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Helen realized that the alternative was not giving in to despair. It was surrendering to invisibility. She forced herself to get up, putting one foot in front of the other, reminding herself that change was not about perfection, but persistence. Yet, the shadows were not just physical. They were emotional too. The years of regret, missed chances with her children, friendships lost to time, dreams set aside for practicality, sometimes surged forward, unbidden and overwhelming. One afternoon, Helen sat with Susan, her daughter, in a quiet cafe. The conversation was tentative at first, both of them tiptoeing around old wounds. Helen shared how much she wished they had more time to understand each other, to heal. Susan confessed her own regrets, how she had resented Helen's silence for so long, how hard it had been to bridge the distance. Tears flowed freely between them, washing away years of pain. That moment of vulnerability was a breakthrough, but it also revealed the depth of what remained unresolved. Helen knew healing was a process, sometimes slow and painful. At a doctor's appointment, Helen faced another reminder of aging's realities. The physician gently explained the risks her body faced, the heart irregularities, the thinning bones, the warning signs that demanded vigilance. You need to slow down, he advised kindly but firmly. Helen nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. It was a sobering contrast to the energy she felt inside, the fire that refused to be extinguished. How could she balance the need to protect her health with the desire to live boldly? That tension weighed heavily on her. One evening, alone in her garage studio, Helen stared at the photographs she had taken over the past year, the images of resilience and beauty, but also of fragility and impermanence. She realized that embracing change also meant embracing vulnerability. It meant acknowledging her limits without surrendering her spirit. Helen reached out to a therapist who specialized in elder care, seeking support to navigate the complex emotions swirling within her. The sessions became a safe space to confront fears of mortality, loneliness, and insignificance. Through this work, Helen learned to accept that aging was a paradox, a time of loss and gain, endings and beginnings. She was not alone in this journey, many others wrestled with the same shadows. Inspired by her therapy, Helen wrote a blog post titled, "Facing the Shadows," sharing her struggles openly for the first time. The response was immediate and profound. Readers thanked her for her honesty, admitting they too had hidden fears and regrets. The dialogue that blossomed felt like a collective healing, a reminder that vulnerability could be a source of strength. Helen realized that true transformation included embracing all parts of herself, the light and the dark. Her physical health remained a daily concern. She adapted her routines to include gentle stretching, physical therapy exercises, and moments of rest. She learned to listen to her body's signals, honoring them without giving in to defeat. Each small victory, walking a little farther, waking without pain, was a triumph. The shadows did not disappear, but they became part of the texture of her life, a reminder of the complexity of being human. One winter morning, Helen received a call that her neighbor had passed away suddenly. The news hit hard, stirring fears about the fragility of life and the unknowns ahead. At the funeral, Helen sat among familiar faces, many of whom she had met through the writing group or community events. The service was a mix of sorrow and celebration, a testament to a life lived with love and courage. Helen thought about her own legacy and the importance of living fully despite uncertainty. After the funeral, Helen joined a support group for seniors facing loss and change. The conversations were raw and honest, filled with grief but also hope. Helen found comfort in the shared stories, realizing that facing the shadows was part of the collective human experience. Through all these challenges, Helen never lost sight of her purpose. She continued to write, to teach, to connect. She allowed herself moments of rest and reflection, knowing that resilience was not about endless energy but the willingness to rise after each fall. On a brisk spring morning, Helen sat in her favorite park, watching children play and the world burst into color around her. She reflected on the journey, the fear, the courage, the setbacks, and the breakthroughs. She understood now that facing the shadows did not mean losing hope, it meant walking alongside it, accepting life in all its complexity. Helen smiled softly, feeling a quiet strength settle deep within. She was still here, still trying, still becoming. And that was enough. After months of facing shadows and confronting fears, Helen felt a stirring inside, a quiet but persistent urge to reclaim dreams she had long set aside. She remembered the notebooks tucked away in the back of a closet, filled with sketches and ideas for a novel she once imagined writing in her younger days. Life had pulled her in so many directions, raising children, caring for Frank, managing the household, that those creative sparks had dimmed under the weight of responsibility. But now, fueled by the courage she'd gathered from her journey, Helen decided it was time to dust off those dreams and breathe new life into them. One chilly morning, wrapped in a soft sweater, Helen sat at her kitchen table with the old notebook spread before her. The pages were yellowed, ink faded, but the passion behind the words was still palpable. She began to read, each sentence rekindling memories and emotions she thought had faded. The characters she had created came alive again, reminding her of the storyteller she still was beneath the layers of doubt and fear. Helen picked up her pen and wrote a single sentence, a simple act that felt revolutionary. The words flowed slowly at first, but with each paragraph, her confidence grew. Writing became a daily ritual, a sacred space where she could explore not only fictional worlds but also her own hopes and struggles. She shared excerpts on her blog, inviting readers to join her in the unfolding story. The response was immediate and encouraging. Readers connected with her vulnerability, the honesty in her characters, and the themes of resilience and renewal. Encouraged by their support, Helen found herself dreaming bigger. She enrolled in a creative writing class at the local community college, eager to learn new techniques and deepen her craft. The classroom was filled with people of all ages, but many were her peers. Seniors who, like her, had waited years to pursue their creative passions. The camaraderie and shared determination created a powerful energy. Helen felt a renewed sense of belonging and possibility. One afternoon, the instructor assigned a project: write a story about a moment that changed your life. Helen knew immediately what she wanted to write. The moment Elon Musk's words sparked the fire inside her, the decision to try again at 73. The act of putting that moment into words was cathartic, and sharing it with the class brought tears and applause. Helen realized her story was not just hers, it belonged to anyone who had ever felt too old, too tired, or too scared to begin again. Outside the classroom, Helen began exploring other creative outlets. She started painting again, her brush strokes tentative but growing bolder. The colors on the canvas reflected the emotions she had carried: grief, hope, joy, and resilience. Painting became a companion to writing, another language through which she expressed her evolving self. As Helen's confidence grew, she dreamed of publishing her novel. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Could a woman in her 70s really become a published author? Would anyone want to read her work? Doubts whispered in her mind, but she remembered the lessons she'd learned. Courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. With support from her writing group and family, Helen researched self-publishing options, learning about editing, formatting, and marketing. She discovered an online community of older authors who shared advice and encouragement. The process was challenging, but each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. One sunny morning, Helen held in her hands the first printed copy of her novel, a modest book, but a tangible testament to her perseverance. She sent copies to her children and friends, each note of congratulations warming her heart. At a local bookstore, Helen arranged a reading and signing event. Standing before the small but enthusiastic crowd, she read excerpts from her book, her voice steady and full of emotion. Listeners nodded, laughed, and wiped tears. The event was more than a celebration of her work, it was a declaration that dreams do not expire with age. Helen's journey inspired others to examine their own deferred dreams. A woman in the audience told Helen she had always wanted to learn to dance but was afraid to start at her age. Another man shared plans to reopen a business he had closed years ago. These conversations filled Helen with a profound sense of purpose. She began organizing monthly dream circles at the community center, gatherings where people could share their dreams, support each other, and take small steps toward realizing their goals. The circles became a source of hope and action, a living network of encouragement and accountability. Helen's own dreams continued to evolve. She considered writing a memoir, documenting not only her personal transformation but also the broader movement of older adults embracing change. She envisioned a future where aging was celebrated as a time of creativity, connection, and contribution rather than decline. One evening, as Helen sat by her fireplace, pen in hand, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. The losses and fears, the breakthroughs and friendships, they all wove together into a tapestry of resilience. She thought of Elon Musk's example, not just his inventions and successes, but his refusal to accept limits and his willingness to embrace risk and failure. Helen knew her own transformation was a quiet rebellion against invisibility and despair. She smiled softly, feeling a deep gratitude for the chance to rekindle her dreams and to live them out loud. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Helen looked forward to it with anticipation rather than fear. She was ready to keep dreaming, keep creating, and keep inspiring, proof that it's never too late to begin again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Helen's renewed dreams brought new energy not just to herself but to the relationships she'd long wished to mend. She realized that the transformations inside her called for a reaching out, a building of bridges she had once allowed to crumble under the weight of silence and regret. The first bridge she chose to rebuild was with her son, Michael. Their last conversation years ago had ended in frustration and misunderstanding, leaving a chasm of distance and resentment. Helen wasn't naive, she knew that years apart meant that rebuilding would take patience and humility. One spring afternoon, with trembling hands and a heart pounding like a drum, Helen dialed Michael's number. When he answered, his voice was cautious but not unkind. She spoke from the heart, apologizing for the years of distance, for the moments she hadn't been there, for the silence between them. Michael listened quietly, the usual tension in his voice softening. Over the weeks, their conversations grew longer, more honest. They shared stories, memories, and eventually laughter. Helen discovered that Michael's life had its own struggles and triumphs, and that beneath the protective walls they'd both built, there was love waiting to be reclaimed. This fragile new connection became a source of hope, a testament to the power of vulnerability and forgiveness. With Michael's encouragement, Helen invited him and his family to visit her home. The reunion was awkward at first but filled with promise. Watching her grandchildren run through the garden, Helen felt the threads of family weaving back together. She understood that building bridges wasn't about erasing the past but creating a new path forward. Inspired by this personal breakthrough, Helen turned her attention to the community around her. The festival she had spoken at years before had grown, and she saw an opportunity to create a lasting space for connection and growth. She proposed a community center program called Bridges, aimed at fostering intergenerational dialogue and collaboration. The idea was simple but powerful: bring seniors and young people together to share skills, stories, and support, breaking down barriers of age and misunderstanding. Helen partnered with the local library, schools, and senior centers to launch the program. The first meetings were a mix of curiosity and awkwardness. Teenagers slouched in chairs, unsure of what to expect. Seniors sat with wary smiles, uncertain if their voices would be heard. But Helen's warmth and determination created a safe space. She shared her own story, her struggles and triumphs, setting the tone for openness and respect. Slowly, the walls began to come down. Seniors taught cooking, gardening, and storytelling, teens shared technology skills, music, and fresh perspectives. Conversations flowed about dreams, fears, and the hopes for the future. Helen watched as friendships blossomed across generations, bonds that brought energy and understanding to all involved. The success of Bridges led to local media attention, and Helen was invited to speak on a radio show about the importance of community and connection in later life. She talked candidly about loneliness, the need to be seen and heard, and the healing power of reaching across divides. Her message resonated deeply with listeners, many of whom called in to share their own experiences and gratitude. Helen's work soon attracted volunteers and funding, allowing Bridges to expand. She found herself busier than ever. Organizing events, mentoring participants, and advocating for policies supporting aging with dignity and engagement. Despite the demands, Helen felt invigorated. Each connection made, each story shared, reinforced her belief that no one should face aging alone or invisible. Her relationships with her children continued to deepen, too. Susan often helped with the Bridges program, and Michael's family became frequent visitors. Helen saw how rebuilding her family bridges not only healed old wounds but created a stronger foundation for her later years. One day, during a Bridges session, a young man named Carlos shared that he had been struggling with his own identity and future. Helen listened with compassion, offering encouragement and wisdom from her years of experience. Afterward, Carlos stayed behind to ask more questions about her writing and life journey. Their conversation sparked a friendship that crossed the usual generational boundaries. Carlos began volunteering regularly, helping Helen with technology and sharing his passion for music at community events. Helen saw in Carlos the same restless spirit she had once felt, the desire to break free from expectations and create something meaningful. Their friendship reminded her that building bridges wasn't just about healing the past but nurturing the future. As spring turned to summer, Helen organized a community art project, the Bridge Mural, where participants painted a large mural symbolizing connection, growth, and resilience. The mural became a vibrant testament to the power of collaboration, featuring images of hands reaching across gaps, trees rooted deep in shared soil, and bright stars shining against a dark sky. The unveiling was a joyful celebration, attended by families, neighbors, and local leaders. Helen's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. Yet, she knew the work of building bridges was ongoing. It required continuous effort, humility, and openness to change. Helen herself continued to learn, from the young and the old, from successes and setbacks. She embraced the messy, beautiful complexity of human connection. One evening, as Helen sat on her porch watching fireflies blink in the twilight, she reflected on how far she had come. The bridges she had built, within her family, her community, and herself, were not just about reconciliation but about creating a future where aging meant thriving, not fading away. She thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive to innovate and disrupt, how he refused to accept the limits imposed by others or by fear. Helen understood that building bridges was her own way of pushing boundaries, redefining what it meant to grow older. Her legacy was not just the programs or stories but the lives touched and transformed by connection and hope. With a contented sigh, Helen whispered into the warm night air, "We're all stronger when we build together." The stars above seemed to shimmer in agreement, illuminating the path forward, one bridge, one heart, one dream at a time. Helen sat quietly in her favorite chair, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands, reflecting on how far she'd come since that moment at 73 when she thought it was over. Yet beneath the calm surface, a restless pulse beat, an urge to take an even bigger step, to leap beyond what she had dared before. The dream of writing and building community was real, but there was a new challenge whispering to her, to speak out more boldly, to share her story on a larger stage, and to become a beacon for others who felt stuck, invisible, or too old to change. The idea terrified her and thrilled her all at once. She had always been cautious, preferring the quiet rhythms of home and small gatherings. Public speaking was not a natural comfort zone, especially for someone who had spent years shrinking into the background. Yet Helen knew that fear was often the signpost pointing toward growth. Inspired once again by Elon Musk's willingness to risk everything on uncertain ventures, Helen decided she would say yes to this next chapter, no matter how scary it seemed. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A local nonprofit focused on aging invited her to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference. The theme was Reinventing Life After 60, and Helen's story of transformation fit perfectly. She hesitated, imagining standing before a crowd, her voice shaking, her hands trembling. But she remembered her own words, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it." She accepted. Preparing for the speech was a challenge. Helen spent hours drafting and revising, trying to capture the essence of her journey, the pain, the hope, the fire that Elon Musk's example had ignited inside her. She practiced in front of the mirror, her cat as the sole audience, stumbling over phrases, questioning if she was truly ready. As the day approached, nerves threatened to overwhelm her. The night before, Helen lay awake, heart pounding, doubts swirling. Who am I to stand before all those people, she wondered. Yet she found solace in a quote she had pinned on her bulletin board. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." On the morning of the conference, Helen dressed carefully in a simple but elegant blouse and slacks, her silver hair brushed back. Arriving at the venue, she was greeted by warm smiles and a buzz of excitement. Backstage, she met other speakers, experts, activists, elders who had blazed trails of their own. Their presence was both intimidating and inspiring. When it was her turn, Helen stepped onto the stage, the spotlight bright, the auditorium filled with hundreds of faces waiting to hear her story. She took a deep breath and began. Her voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke of her fears, her loneliness, and the moment she thought life had ended at 73. She shared how Elon Musk's words had sparked a fire within her, leading her to write, rebuild family bridges, and create community connections. Helen spoke candidly about the challenges of aging, the pain of loss, but also the power of reinvention and hope. She saw nods of recognition, tears glistening in eyes, and hands clapping in encouragement. The speech was not perfect, but it was real, and that authenticity resonated deeply. Afterward, people approached Helen with gratitude and stories of their own struggles and dreams. Some were seniors ready to try something new, others were caregivers desperate for hope. Helen realized her voice could be a lifeline for many. This realization ignited a new purpose. She began accepting invitations to speak at events, write opinion pieces, and participate in podcasts. Her story spread beyond her small town, reaching people who saw themselves in her journey. The experience also challenged Helen to grow. Public speaking demanded vulnerability and resilience. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes nerves overwhelmed her. But each time she stood up again, she became stronger. Behind the scenes, Helen continued her personal work, writing, painting, and nurturing relationships. The leap of faith was not a single act but a series of small, courageous steps. One particularly moving moment came when Helen received an email from a woman named Diane, who wrote that Helen's speech had inspired her to leave an unfulfilling job and start volunteering with seniors. Diane's words reminded Helen that her efforts were making a tangible difference. As Helen's public presence expanded, she also faced new challenges. Not everyone was supportive. Some questioned why an older woman would speak about innovation and change. Others dismissed her as irrelevant in a culture obsessed with youth. These moments stung, but Helen refused to be deterred. She remembered Musk's example, how he faced criticism and skepticism but pressed forward. Helen found allies in unexpected places, young activists, community leaders, and fellow elders committed to rewriting the narrative around aging. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to empowering seniors to live boldly and visibly. The coalition launched initiatives including workshops on technology use, entrepreneurship, and creative expression tailored for older adults. Helen played a vital role, sharing her story and mentoring others to find their voices. The work was demanding but fulfilling. Helen also used social media to amplify the message, creating videos and posts that blended humor, honesty, and inspiration. Her authenticity drew a growing audience of seniors and allies who found in her a relatable and uplifting figure. One afternoon, Helen received a surprising invitation, a televised interview on a national program focusing on aging and innovation. The prospect was daunting, but she accepted. Preparing for the interview, Helen thought deeply about what she wanted to convey, that aging was not an endpoint but a frontier full of possibility. The interview aired to positive reviews, sparking conversations nationwide. Helen was flooded with messages of support and new invitations to speak. Through it all, Helen remained grounded. She made time for quiet moments, morning walks, writing sessions, phone calls with family. She knew the leap of faith was as much about balance as about boldness. The journey transformed not only how others saw her but how she saw herself. Helen no longer identified as the invisible, fading woman she once feared she was. She was a storyteller, a bridge builder, a catalyst for change. She was living proof that life after 73 could be vibrant, meaningful, and full of surprises. One evening, after a long day of meetings and speaking, Helen sat by the window, gazing at the stars. She thought about the leaps she had taken, the risks, the fears, the moments of doubt. And she felt a profound gratitude. The leap of faith had not guaranteed smooth sailing, but it had opened doors to new beginnings, connections, and a renewed sense of purpose. Helen whispered a quiet promise to herself, to keep leaping, to keep growing, to keep inspiring. Because life was far too precious to waste waiting in the shadows. And somewhere deep inside, she knew Elon Musk's spirit of fearless innovation would always be a spark lighting her way forward. Helen's new life, full of purpose and public speaking, was not without its tempests. Just as the spring rains can bring both renewal and floods, so too did Helen face challenges that tested her resolve and threatened to wash away the fragile progress she'd made. The most unexpected storm came from within her own body. After months of busy schedules, long drives, and emotional highs, Helen began to notice a persistent fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. At first, she dismissed it as normal aging, the toll of decades catching up with her. But when a sharp pain settled in her chest one morning, she knew she couldn't ignore the signs. At the doctor's office, the news was sobering. Helen had early-stage heart disease, a condition that required immediate lifestyle changes and careful management. The doctor warned her to slow down, to avoid stress and intense activity. Helen left the clinic with a heavy heart. For a moment, the old fears crept back, the fear of fading away, of being too old to fight, of losing the momentum she had worked so hard to build. Yet the lessons of her journey whispered in her mind. She remembered Elon Musk's persistence through setbacks, the refusal to accept limitations as permanent. Helen resolved to face this new challenge not as an end, but as another phase to navigate. She adjusted her schedule, cutting back on travel and high-stress engagements. Instead, she focused on local events, gentle activities, and deepening her personal connections. The change felt like a setback, but Helen reframed it as an opportunity to listen to her body and mind, to cultivate patience and resilience. The Bridges program continued to thrive under the leadership of trusted volunteers, and Helen stayed involved through mentoring and planning, balancing her health needs with her passion. But the storm was not just physical. The emotional weight of the diagnosis brought waves of doubt and anxiety. Helen found herself wrestling with the question, was this the final test? Could she sustain the fight she had waged against invisibility and despair? One particularly difficult day, Helen sat by her window watching a thunderstorm roll across the sky. The dark clouds and flashes of lightning mirrored her turbulent emotions. In that moment, she picked up her phone and called Michael. His voice was steady and comforting, reminding her she was not alone. Their conversation helped Helen anchor herself. She realized that facing the storm meant accepting vulnerability and seeking support, not just soldiering on. Helen also leaned on her writing and painting as outlets for processing fear and uncertainty. Her latest pieces, darker and more introspective, captured the fragility of life and the fierce will to endure. Sharing these works with her writing group brought empathy and encouragement, reinforcing her sense of community and belonging. One afternoon, during a routine checkup, Helen's cardiologist introduced her to a cardiac rehabilitation program tailored for seniors. It combined gentle exercise, nutrition counseling, and emotional support. Helen hesitated. Was this something she could commit to at her age? But then she remembered Elon Musk's words about risk and persistence. She signed up. The rehabilitation center became a new sanctuary. Helen met others facing similar challenges, people who refused to let diagnosis define them. Together, they encouraged each other, sharing stories of setbacks and small victories. Helen found strength in this camaraderie, discovering that healing was both personal and collective. Through the program, Helen learned new ways to care for her body without sacrificing joy. She began gentle walks in the park, breathing deeply and savoring the rhythm of her steps. She adjusted her diet, experimenting with colorful vegetables and wholesome meals that made her feel vibrant. These changes were not easy, but Helen celebrated each milestone. As Helen navigated these physical and emotional storms, she also encountered moments of doubt from others. Some friends expressed concern, suggesting she slow down even more, while strangers online questioned why she was pushing so hard at her age. These voices challenged her, but Helen held fast to her belief that life was about balance, not giving up, but adapting with grace. One day, Helen received a letter from a woman named Joan, who shared her own story of heart disease and reinvention after 65. Joan wrote of the fear, the isolation, and the unexpected joy of finding new purpose despite limitations. Her words were a balm to Helen's soul, a reminder that she was part of a larger community of survivors and dreamers. Inspired, Helen began writing a new blog series, Storm Stories, where seniors could share their battles with health, loss, and resilience. The series grew quickly, creating a space where people could find solidarity and strength. Helen's own story of facing heart disease became a beacon within this collection, honest and raw. As the months passed, Helen felt herself growing stronger, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. She learned to accept help without shame, to rest without guilt, and to cherish the moments of peace amid chaos. The storm had tested her, but it also deepened her compassion and wisdom. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of therapy, Helen sat in her living room surrounded by paintings and notebooks. She reflected on the irony that the very things she feared, aging, illness, loss, had become sources of insight and connection. Helen smiled softly, grateful for the journey and ready for whatever came next. She knew storms would continue to come, but now she had the tools and courage to weather them. In the quiet of the night, Helen whispered a promise to herself, to keep fighting, keep dreaming, and keep building bridges, no matter how fierce the storm. The dawn came gently over Helen's small town, casting a soft golden glow through the curtains of her bedroom. She lay awake for a moment, feeling the cool morning air and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, a reminder that despite the storm she'd weathered, she was still here, still moving forward. The diagnosis and the challenges had altered the shape of her days, but they hadn't diminished her spirit. Instead, they had opened a new horizon, a space of possibility she hadn't fully imagined before. Inspired by her journey and the community she'd helped build, Helen began to dream bigger. The Bridges program, once a local initiative, had grown beyond her expectations, touching lives in nearby towns and even drawing attention from state officials. Helen realized that the work she'd started could become a model for communities everywhere, a way to combat loneliness and ageism through connection and purpose. Fueled by this vision, Helen decided to write a book. She wanted to share not only her story but the stories of countless others who had found new life after loss, illness, and doubt. The project felt daunting. How could she distill decades of pain, hope, and transformation into pages that would inspire and empower? But the same voice that had urged her to speak at conferences and share her story online encouraged her again, start. Just start. Helen began by writing every morning, capturing memories, reflections, and the voices of those she'd met. She included stories from Bridges participants, from Michael and Susan, and even from Carlos, whose youthful energy had reminded her of the unquenchable flame of possibility. Writing became a daily ritual, a way to anchor herself in purpose and creativity. As the manuscript grew, so did Helen's confidence. She reached out to a local publisher who specialized in memoirs and inspirational works. To her surprise, they responded with enthusiasm, eager to help bring her vision to life. The publishing process was new territory, full of unfamiliar terminology, deadlines, and revisions, but Helen embraced it with the same courage she'd shown in every chapter of her reinvention. Meanwhile, Helen's health remained a careful priority. She balanced her writing with gentle exercise, meditation, and regular check-ins with her cardiologist. This balance kept her grounded, reminding her that growth and self-care must go hand in hand. The book's working title became At 73, I Thought It Was Over, then Elon Musk gave me a reason to try again, a nod to the spark that had ignited her transformation and a beacon for others who might feel their time had passed. As Helen prepared for the book launch, she organized an event at the community center, inviting Bridges participants, family, friends, and supporters. The gathering was both celebration and testimony, a shared acknowledgement of what could happen when hope met action. On the night of the launch, Helen stood before the crowd, her voice steady as she read excerpts from the book. Tears and laughter mingled in the room as people recognized their own journeys reflected in her words. The book quickly found an audience beyond her town, touching readers across the country who shared messages of gratitude and renewed purpose. Helen's story became a catalyst for new conversations about aging, resilience, and the power of community. Invitations came to speak at libraries, universities, and senior centers nationwide. Each engagement deepened Helen's understanding of how universal her message was, that life after 70, after illness, after loss, could be vibrant and meaningful. Yet amid the growing recognition, Helen remained humble and grounded. She continued to nurture her close relationships, finding joy in simple moments, afternoon tea with Susan, phone calls with Michael, music sessions with Carlos. These connections were her true wealth. One afternoon, Helen received an unexpected letter from Elon Musk's foundation. They had learned about her book and community work and wanted to invite her to a summit focused on innovation and social impact. The invitation felt surreal, a full-circle moment connecting the man who had sparked her journey with the life she had built. At the summit, Helen found herself among innovators, entrepreneurs, and changemakers of all ages. She shared her story with the crowd, emphasizing that innovation was not just about technology or youth, but about the courage to keep trying, to reinvent, to build bridges across divides. Elon Musk himself was present, and after her talk, he approached Helen with a warm handshake and words of encouragement. "Keep pushing boundaries," he said simply. That moment was both humbling and electrifying, a reminder that no one is too old to dream or disrupt the status quo. Returning home, Helen felt a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. She understood that her new horizon was not a destination but a journey, a continuous unfolding of growth, connection, and impact. She planned to continue writing, speaking, and advocating, knowing that each day held the potential for change. As the sun set over her town, Helen sat on her porch, the book resting on her lap and the evening breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. She reflected on the path that had brought her here, from the fear and isolation of the early days to the vibrant community and new horizons she now embraced. Helen whispered a gratitude to the universe, to Elon Musk's spark, and to herself for having the courage to leap, to face storms, and to keep moving forward. The future stretched wide and bright before her, a new horizon waiting to be explored, one brave step at a time. Helen woke to the familiar sound of birdsong filtering through her bedroom window. The morning light painted soft hues on her walls, a gentle reminder of new beginnings. After the whirlwind of the book launch and the summit, she felt energized but also deeply aware of the work yet to be done. The Bridges program, which had started as a simple idea to connect lonely seniors in her small town, was now growing into something much bigger, a movement. Helen's vision expanded beyond local boundaries. She dreamed of building bridges that crossed not just towns or states, but generations, cultures, and experiences. She believed deeply that connection was the antidote to the isolation so many elders faced, and that by fostering understanding between young and old, the entire community could be enriched. The challenge was how to translate this vision into action on a broader scale. Helen spent hours on the phone with community leaders, social workers, and activists across the country, sharing the Bridges model and brainstorming ways to adapt it to diverse settings. Each conversation revealed new needs and opportunities: rural areas struggling with access, urban neighborhoods where seniors felt invisible, multicultural communities where language and tradition shaped the aging experience differently. Helen realized that building bridges required listening as much as leading. She embarked on a series of visits, traveling to meet with groups who wanted to launch their own Bridges chapters. These journeys took her to nursing homes in Vermont, community centers in Arizona, and church halls in Georgia. Everywhere she went, Helen was welcomed warmly, the spark of possibility reflected in eager faces. She listened to stories of loneliness, resilience, and hope, and shared lessons from her own path. Helen adapted the program's core elements: peer support, creative expression, technology training, to fit local cultures and needs. She collaborated with younger volunteers, recognizing the power of intergenerational exchange. One of her favorite visits was to a youth detention center in Ohio, where she met teenagers hungry for connection and purpose. Together, they started a pen pal project linking the youth with seniors in the Bridges network. The project blossomed quickly, bridging divides of age and experience, replacing judgment with empathy. Helen was moved by the letters, young voices expressing dreams and regrets, elders sharing wisdom and laughter. These small bridges became lifelines for everyone involved. Back home, Helen also worked to build digital bridges. Recognizing that technology could be both a barrier and a lifeline, she partnered with tech companies and local libraries to offer training workshops tailored for seniors. With patient tutors and easy-to-follow lessons, many participants overcame fears of smartphones, social media, and video calls. Helen delighted in watching a once reluctant woman video chat with her grandchildren for the first time, or a man reconnect with an old friend through email. The digital connection extended the reach of bridges far beyond physical spaces. Throughout this expansion, Helen remained deeply connected to the heart of her work, the human stories. She collected testimonials and photos, creating a digital archive that captured the richness of the Bridges community. This archive became a resource for advocacy, education, and inspiration. Helen was invited to speak at conferences and universities about aging, community building, and the power of narrative. Each opportunity deepened her conviction that the stories of elders deserved to be heard and valued. However, scaling the program brought new challenges. Funding was always a concern, and managing volunteers and chapters across the country tested Helen's organizational skills. She navigated bureaucracy, grant applications, and the occasional disappointment of plans that didn't unfold as hoped. Yet she met each obstacle with the resilience she had cultivated over years, drawing strength from small victories and the unwavering belief in the mission. Helen's family remained a vital source of support. Michael and Susan celebrated her successes and reminded her to care for herself. Carlos continued to inspire her with his music and youthful spirit. Their love and connection grounded Helen amid the expanding demands of her work. One afternoon, as Helen prepared for a panel discussion on community and aging, she received an unexpected call from a major foundation interested in partnering with Bridges. They proposed funding a pilot program integrating Bridges with healthcare providers to address seniors' emotional well-being alongside physical health. This integration was a dream come true for Helen, blending her passion for connection with practical support. The pilot launched with careful planning and enthusiasm. Bridges volunteers received training in basic mental health first aid, and the program offered workshops on coping with loss, loneliness, and chronic illness. Helen saw participants flourish, finding new friendships, renewed confidence, and improved health outcomes. The success attracted media attention, further spreading the message that aging was not a decline but a dynamic stage of life. Helen was invited to write opinion pieces and appear on talk shows, always emphasizing the dignity and value of elders. Yet despite the growing visibility, Helen stayed humble and focused on relationships. She often visited seniors in their homes, sharing meals and stories, reminding herself of the individual lives behind the movement. One such visit was with Margaret, an 82-year-old widow who had struggled with depression and isolation. Through Bridges, Margaret found a community and a creative outlet in painting. Helen watched as Margaret's face lit up during their visits, her art blossoming alongside her spirit. These moments were reminders that the true power of Bridges lay in human connection. As the program expanded, Helen began mentoring emerging leaders within the network, many of whom were seniors themselves. She encouraged them to take ownership, innovate, and share their unique voices. This ripple effect ensured that Bridges was not just her vision but a collective movement with roots deep in communities across the country. Helen's journey, once solitary and uncertain, had become a shared mission, building bridges beyond age, beyond isolation, and beyond fear. One evening, Helen sat at her desk reviewing plans for the next phase, an international exchange program linking seniors across continents to share stories and traditions. The idea felt audacious but fitting. She smiled, recalling how a single spark from Elon Musk's example had set her on this path of transformation. Now, that spark had ignited a flame that warmed thousands. Helen whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude and determination. The, The horizon before her was vast, filled with challenges and promise. She was ready to keep building, one bridge at a time. Helen had always believed that life's most profound lessons came wrapped in surprises, and this chapter of her journey proved it true again. After months of tireless work expanding the Bridges program, balancing speaking engagements, writing, and mentoring, Helen thought she had learned to expect the unexpected. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the letter that arrived on a crisp autumn morning. It was handwritten, on elegant stationery, with a return address from California. Helen's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a note from a woman named Clara, a stranger who had stumbled upon Helen's book online. Clara was 78, living alone after losing her husband 5 years earlier, and had been struggling with despair and isolation. Helen's story, Clara wrote, was a lifeline, a beacon of hope that pushed her to take small steps toward reclaiming joy and connection. The letter went on to describe how Clara had joined a local senior center, started painting again, and even reached out to an old friend. Helen felt tears prick her eyes. The power of one story to ignite change in another person was staggering. It reminded her of the ripple effect Bridges aimed to create. Inspired, Helen replied immediately, starting a correspondence that blossomed into a friendship. Clara's letters brought new perspectives and encouragement. They shared triumphs and setbacks, joys and fears, weaving a tapestry of connection that transcended miles. This unexpected gift of friendship rekindled Helen's faith in the profound impact of personal stories. Around the same time, Helen received another surprise, an invitation to appear on a popular national television program focused on aging and innovation. The producers had seen her work and wanted her to share the Bridges story with millions. Helen was both excited and nervous. Television was a new arena, and the stakes felt high. But remembering the courage that had brought her this far, she accepted. The day of the taping was a whirlwind. Helen prepared carefully, rehearsing key points but also allowing space for authenticity. On camera, she spoke with warmth and conviction about the challenges of aging, the epidemic of loneliness, and the transformative power of community. The response was overwhelming. Viewers reached out from across the country, many sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. Donations poured into Bridges, enabling Helen to expand programs and support more communities. The exposure also attracted new volunteers, eager to join a movement that valued every life and voice. One message stood out: a young woman named Emily, whose grandmother had recently been admitted to a nursing home and was slipping into silence. Emily asked Helen for advice on how to connect and bring joy to her grandmother's days. Helen responded with practical tips and encouragement, sharing the importance of listening, creativity, and patience. Over the following months, Emily and Helen exchanged letters and videos, developing a mentorship that bridged generations. Helen marveled at how the seed she had planted continued to sprout in unexpected ways. Meanwhile, Helen's own family life flourished. Michael and Susan visited often, their relationships deepening through shared experiences and new traditions. Carlos's music career was taking off, but he always made time to return home, filling the house with his vibrant energy. Helen cherished these moments, knowing that love and connection at home were the foundation for her broader work. Despite the joy, Helen's health continued to demand attention. She maintained her cardiac rehabilitation and embraced meditation and gentle yoga, practices that nurtured both body and spirit. She had learned to honor her limits without surrendering to them, an ongoing balance that required patience and grace. One crisp evening, Helen hosted a gathering at her home, a mix of longtime friends, new acquaintances, Bridges volunteers, and family. The living room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the aroma of homemade food. As Helen looked around, she saw the tapestry of her life reflected in this room, people of different ages, backgrounds, and stories, united by a shared commitment to connection and hope. Michael raised a toast to Helen, celebrating her vision and tenacity. Susan shared a poem she had written inspired by Helen's journey. Carlos played a new song on his guitar, the lyrics echoing themes of resilience and renewal. Helen felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This gathering was more than a party, it was a living testament to what could be built when one person dared to try again. The next day, Helen found a moment alone on the porch, sipping tea and watching leaves fall in the autumn breeze. She reflected on the unexpected gifts of this chapter, friendships forged through letters, new platforms to share her message, and the growing community that embraced her vision. Helen knew that life's greatest gifts often came disguised as challenges or surprises. The key was to remain open, courageous, and ready to receive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow, Helen felt a deep peace settle within her. She whispered a quiet thank you for the journey, the storms, the new horizons, and the unexpected gifts that had shaped her path. With a heart full of hope, she prepared to continue building bridges, one story, one connection, one day at a time. Helen sat at her kitchen table one chilly morning, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands as she scrolled through emails on her laptop. The Bridges network was thriving far beyond what she'd imagined, with chapters popping up in small towns, big cities, and even rural communities she'd never visited. Each message told a story of transformation, of seniors reclaiming purpose, of friendships forming across generations, of loneliness dissolving into laughter and shared memories. Helen's heart swelled with pride and humility. It was humbling to witness how a spark, once lit by a simple decision to try again, could ripple outward like concentric circles on a still pond. The ripple effect of her work was real and palpable. Helen thought back to the early days, when she was confined by fear and self-doubt, feeling invisible in a world that often overlooked those over 70. Now, thousands of people were stepping into new chapters of life, rewriting the narrative of aging itself. She recalled Elon Musk's words that had once ignited her spirit: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. She realized that importance wasn't reserved for the young or the wildly successful, it belonged to anyone brave enough to believe in second chances. As Helen sifted through letters, one caught her eye, a note from a man named Samuel in Montana. Samuel was 80 and had recently lost his wife of 50 years. He wrote about the crushing loneliness that followed, and how the local Bridges chapter helped him find solace through volunteer work in storytelling circles. Helen responded with encouragement and invited Samuel to share his story on the Bridges website. Soon, his story inspired others, many of whom wrote back to thank him for their own moments of hope. Helen's inbox was filled with similar stories, each one a thread weaving a larger tapestry of human resilience. In the afternoons, Helen often met with new leaders within the network via video calls. She mentored them on everything from community organizing to digital literacy, emphasizing that leadership wasn't about authority but about serving others. One such leader was Denise, a 75-year-old retired teacher from Detroit who had transformed her church basement into a vibrant gathering place for seniors and youth. Denise's energy reminded Helen of her younger self, curious, persistent, and hopeful. Together, they planned a national virtual summit to connect Bridges chapters and share best practices. The summit was a monumental success, drawing hundreds of participants. Stories of triumph mingled with candid discussions of setbacks and fears, creating a space where vulnerability was met with compassion and strength. Helen watched as the network grew not just in numbers but in spirit, a living testament to the power of connection. Yet even as the ripple effect expanded, Helen remained grounded in her own journey. She continued to write her memoir, revising drafts and weaving in voices from the community. The process was cathartic, reminding her of how far she had come and how much further there was to go. Writing also helped her process moments of grief, including the recent passing of her longtime neighbor and friend, Dorothy. Dorothy had been a quiet force of kindness in Helen's life, a reminder that even small acts could leave a lasting impact. Helen honored Dorothy's memory by dedicating a Bridges Scholarship Fund in her name, providing resources for seniors seeking new skills and opportunities. Helen also took time to nurture her personal well-being. She walked daily through the park near her home, feeling the crunch of autumn leaves beneath her feet and the crispness of the air filling her lungs. These walks became moments of meditation and gratitude, a chance to reconnect with nature and herself. She practiced mindfulness, reminding herself that growth was not a straight line but a series of ebbs and flows. One afternoon, Helen received an unexpected invitation to participate in a panel at a global conference on aging, held in New York City. The theme was Reimagining Life After 60, and Helen was honored to join thought leaders, policymakers, and activists from around the world. At the conference, Helen shared the Bridges story with a captivated audience. She spoke passionately about dismantling ageist stereotypes and empowering elders to be active participants in society. Her message resonated deeply, sparking conversations and commitments to action. After her talk, several attendees approached Helen, eager to collaborate and bring Bridges-inspired programs to their countries. The global dimension of her work felt exhilarating and daunting all at once. Helen was reminded of the interconnectedness of humanity, the universal longing for belonging, purpose, and respect regardless of age or place. Back home, Helen's relationships continued to be a source of joy and strength. Michael and Susan's visits became more frequent, and Carlos's music blossomed with a new maturity and depth. Helen treasured these moments, knowing that family was the foundation of everything she was building. One quiet evening, as she sat by the fireplace reading letters from Bridges participants, Helen was struck by the enormity of the ripple effect she had helped set in motion. What had started as a single choice, to try again despite fear and doubt, had grown into a movement transforming countless lives. She realized that her legacy was not just in the programs or books but in the hearts and minds she had touched. Helen understood now that the true power of change came from embracing vulnerability, forging connection, and daring to hope. As the fire crackled softly, Helen whispered a gratitude for the journey, its challenges, its gifts, and the infinite ripples yet to come. The horizon before her remained wide and bright, inviting her to keep moving forward, one step at a time, one bridge at a time. Despite the outward success of Bridges and the inspiring connections it fostered, Helen knew that the shadows of doubt and fear still lurked within her, and within so many of the seniors she had met along the way. Aging, she had come to understand, was not just about physical decline or loneliness, it was about confronting the parts of ourselves that felt broken, forgotten, or unworthy. One chilly winter morning, Helen woke with a heaviness she hadn't felt in months. The fatigue wasn't physical but emotional, a reminder that healing was never a straight path. She had been juggling so many responsibilities, from coordinating volunteers to managing finances to mentoring emerging leaders, that the pressure was beginning to weigh on her. She wondered if she had pushed herself too far, if the light she carried was dimming. Helen remembered a quote she had once heard from Elon Musk during a podcast interview: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." The words echoed in her mind like a challenge and a comfort. But even Musk, with all his drive and ambition, spoke openly about the loneliness and fear that came with pursuing audacious dreams. Helen decided to take a day for herself, to face the shadows head-on rather than bury them beneath busyness. She drove to a quiet spot by a frozen lake, a place she had discovered years ago but rarely visited recently. The stillness of the icy water and the barren trees mirrored the chill in her heart, but also invited reflection. Sitting on a weathered bench, Helen pulled her coat tighter and closed her eyes. She allowed herself to feel the sadness, the exhaustion, the fear of fading away unnoticed. Tears came unbidden, but with them, a strange sense of release. Helen thought of the many seniors she had met who carried their own shadows, grief over lost spouses, regrets about unfulfilled dreams, fear of becoming burdens. She realized that Bridges was not just about connection and purpose, it was also about holding space for those darker emotions, acknowledging them without shame. Inspired by this insight, Helen began to integrate mindfulness and emotional resilience workshops into the Bridges curriculum. She invited counselors and therapists to lead sessions on grief, anxiety, and self-compassion. The response was profound. Seniors who had long hidden their pain found a safe place to speak their truth. Tears flowed freely in group circles, but so did laughter and hope. Helen saw that facing shadows together lightened the load and deepened the bonds. One participant, a gentle man named George, shared how his anger and loneliness had almost consumed him after losing his wife. Through Bridges, and especially the new emotional support groups, George rediscovered kindness and connection. Helen felt humbled and honored to witness such transformations. Yet, confronting shadows wasn't easy for everyone. Some resisted, fearing vulnerability or shame. Helen met this resistance with patience and compassion, recognizing that healing unfolded at its own pace. She herself continued to wrestle with moments of self-doubt and weariness, leaning on her family and friends for strength. Michael reminded her to rest and celebrate small wins. Susan encouraged her to keep sharing her story authentically. Carlos's music lifted her spirit on difficult days. One particularly dark evening, after a long day filled with administrative setbacks and fundraising challenges, Helen sat by the fireplace feeling overwhelmed. She picked up her phone and played a video clip she had saved months earlier, a speech by Elon Musk about failure and perseverance. His words cut through the fog: failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. Helen allowed herself to accept that setbacks were part of growth, not signs of defeat. This shift in mindset gave her renewed resolve. She reached out to a struggling Bridges chapter in a small Midwestern town where volunteer numbers were dwindling, and spirits were low. Through calls and video meetings, Helen helped them reimagine their approach, focusing on the unique strengths of their community. Slowly, the chapter revived, reminding Helen that sometimes all it took was a little encouragement and a fresh perspective. Helen also began writing candidly about the shadows in her memoir, weaving her struggles alongside her triumphs. She hoped that by sharing both light and dark, she could offer readers a more honest and relatable picture of aging. Vulnerability, she learned, was a bridge as vital as any other. As winter gave way to early spring, Helen noticed a shift within herself and her community. The shadows hadn't disappeared, but they no longer held the power to paralyze. Instead, they became part of a richer, more complex story of resilience and hope. Helen's own journey had deepened. Not just as a leader but as a human being embracing the full spectrum of life. One afternoon, Helen received a call from a Bridges participant named Ruth, who had been silent for months. Ruth had battled depression and isolation since her husband's death. Now, with trembling voice, she shared that she had decided to rejoin a community choir and was even volunteering at a local shelter. Helen felt tears of joy. This was the ripple effect of facing shadows together, small victories that illuminated the path forward. Helen understood that the shadows would always be there, but so would the light she and so many others had found. Together, they could walk through the darkness, hand in hand, building bridges strong enough to hold the full weight of life. As Helen closed her journal that evening, she whispered a promise to herself, to keep facing the shadows with courage, compassion, and an open heart. Because it was in those moments, where fear met hope, that true transformation was born. Helen's phone buzzed one afternoon with a message that made her heart race, a surprising invitation from a local university to deliver a keynote speech at their annual conference on aging innovation. It was a prestigious opportunity, the kind that could amplify Bridges' mission to an even broader audience. But with it came a gnawing question: was she ready? At 76, stepping onto a university stage, speaking to academics, students, and policymakers, it felt like stepping into an arena where her age and lack of formal credentials might make her an outsider. Doubt crept in. She remembered a time not long ago when she'd questioned if she even had anything left to offer. The comfort of her small, supportive community now collided with the vast unknown of a public spotlight. Yet beneath the uncertainty, a flicker of excitement burned. This was what she had worked toward, a chance to challenge stereotypes and inspire change on a grand scale. She reflected on Elon Musk's relentless drive to tackle seemingly impossible goals. His famous words surfaced in her mind: if something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Helen realized that this was her leap of faith, the moment to cast aside fear and embrace possibility. She accepted the invitation, diving into preparation with determination and vulnerability. Helen spent weeks crafting her speech, balancing facts and stories, data and emotion. She wove in the stories of Bridges participants, the letters from strangers like Clara and Samuel, and her own journey from despair to hope. She practiced in front of mirrors, friends, and family, refining her delivery and pacing. The night before the conference, Helen barely slept, nerves tightening her chest. Yet she reminded herself of the purpose behind her courage, to speak for those whose voices were often silenced by age or circumstance. The day arrived, bright and brisk. Helen walked onto the university campus, greeted by curious glances and warm smiles. The auditorium was packed, a sea of faces ranging from eager students to seasoned experts. As she stepped to the podium, a hush fell over the room. Helen took a deep breath and began. She shared her story, the long years of doubt, loss, and isolation, and the choice to try again, inspired by the spark of radical thinking symbolized by Elon Musk. She spoke of bridges, the ripple effect of connection and purpose, and the power of community to redefine what it meant to grow older. Her voice wavered at times, but her conviction was undeniable. As she concluded, the audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. During the Q&A, Helen engaged with thoughtful questions about policy, technology, and the future of aging. She listened as students shared their own experiences with grandparents, their hopes and fears about growing old. She answered with honesty and passion, bridging gaps between generations and disciplines. After the event, Helen was approached by a young professor named Dr. Carter, who specialized in gerontology and social innovation. He praised bridges and proposed a collaboration to study its impact scientifically. Helen was thrilled. This partnership could bring valuable research to support the program's expansion and influence policy on a national level. Over the following months, Helen and Dr. Carter worked closely, organizing focus groups, collecting data, and publishing articles. The academic validation added a new layer of credibility to bridges, attracting grant funding and media attention. Helen's leap of faith had opened doors she hadn't dared imagine. Yet even amid the excitement, Helen remained grounded in the core truth she had learned. That change begins with one person daring to try again, no matter their age or past. She continued visiting Bridges chapters, mentoring leaders, and sharing stories from the heart. She knew that research and accolades were important, but the real transformation happened in kitchens, parks, and living rooms, where seniors reclaimed their stories and futures. One afternoon, Helen received a call from Carlos, who had just landed a gig touring with a well-known band. He was thrilled but also nervous about leaving home for months. Helen encouraged him, reminding him of the importance of following his dreams despite fear. Carlos's journey mirrored hers in so many ways, both learning to leap beyond comfort zones into new beginnings. Their conversations became a source of mutual inspiration. Helen's family life thrived alongside her work. Michael and Susan celebrated their parents' renewed vitality and purpose. They often joked that Helen had become a local celebrity, but beneath the humor was deep respect and pride. At home, Helen continued her daily walks and meditation, practices that sustained her through busy days and inevitable doubts. One evening, as she prepared for another speech at a national conference, Helen paused by the window, watching the stars emerge against the darkening sky. She felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led her here, the losses, the setbacks, the moments of fear and courage. Her leap of faith was not a single act but an ongoing commitment to embrace possibility and purpose. She whispered a promise to keep jumping, to keep building bridges, and to keep lighting the way for others. Because at 76, Helen knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, rich with potential and hope. Helen had always believed that gifts came in neatly wrapped packages, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. But as she approached 77, she learned that the most profound gifts were often unexpected, arriving without fanfare or warning, changing everything in a quiet, unassuming way. It happened on a crisp spring morning when Helen received a call from the local library, inviting her to lead a weekly storytelling workshop for seniors. The program was designed to help participants share their life stories, preserve memories, and connect across generations. Helen hesitated at first. After all, she was more accustomed to public speaking and organizing large events, not facilitating intimate group sessions. But something about the invitation stirred a sense of curiosity and possibility. She accepted. The first workshop was held in a bright, sunlit room filled with mismatched chairs and the soft scent of old books. Helen arrived early, arranging name tags and preparing prompts to help participants unlock memories. As seniors began to trickle in, some shy, some chatty, Helen felt the familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. The group included a wide range of people: veterans, homemakers, artists, former teachers, all carrying decades of stories waiting to be told. Helen gently encouraged each person to share, reminding them that every story mattered. As the sessions progressed, something remarkable happened. The room transformed into a sanctuary of shared humanity. Laughter mingled with tears as memories of love, loss, joy, and regret unfolded. Helen found herself deeply moved by the courage and vulnerability of the participants, many of whom had long felt their stories were invisible or unimportant. In one session, a man named Harold recounted his time as a young mechanic during the Vietnam War. His vivid descriptions brought the past to life, and his eyes sparkled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Another participant, Mary, shared poems she had written but never dared to publish. The group listened with rapt attention, offering encouragement and gratitude. Helen realized that these workshops were more than just storytelling, they were acts of healing and connection. They honored the dignity of aging and reclaimed the power of voice. One afternoon, after the workshop ended, Mary approached Helen with a folder in her hands. She explained that the group had compiled their stories, poems, and reflections into a book. A gift for Helen to celebrate the community they had built together. Helen was overwhelmed. The book was a mosaic of lives lived fully, imperfectly, beautifully. It bore the title, Voices of the Bridge, a tribute to the program Helen had inspired. Tears welled in her eyes as she flipped through pages filled with handwriting, photographs, and illustrations. She saw herself reflected not only in the stories but in the hope and resilience that pulsed through each chapter. The unexpected gift was more than the book itself, it was the realization that Helen's work had created a living legacy. The lives she touched were giving back in ways she had never anticipated. This gift rekindled her sense of purpose and fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. Word of the storytelling workshops and the book spread quickly. Helen was invited to speak at community centers, book clubs, and local radio shows. She shared the power of narrative as a tool for empowerment and connection. The media attention brought new participants to Bridges and sparked interest in replicating the program elsewhere. Helen's days became a blend of workshops, meetings, and quiet moments of reflection. She embraced the rhythm, finding joy in small victories and learning from setbacks. Her relationships with family and friends deepened as she shared her experiences and listened to theirs. One evening, as Helen sat by the fireplace reading letters from workshop attendees, she felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected gifts life continued to offer. She understood that aging was not a fading away but a becoming, an unfolding of wisdom, compassion, and creativity. Helen thought back to Elon Musk's words about fearlessness and innovation. She realized that the true spirit of innovation was not only in technology or business but in the courage to keep growing, sharing, and connecting at any age. The unexpected gift had taught her that life's most precious treasures often come when we open our hearts to possibility and embrace the unknown. As the fire flickered and the night deepened, Helen smiled softly, ready to receive whatever new gifts awaited her on this remarkable journey. Helen stood at the threshold of her home, the morning sun casting long, golden rays across the porch. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of blooming lilacs and freshly cut grass, a scent that, somehow, always felt like hope. Today wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of something new, something she had long imagined but never fully dared to believe possible. Over the past years, Helen's life had transformed in ways that once felt unimaginable. From the quiet despair of feeling forgotten and powerless, she had carved a path of purpose, connection, and resilience. Bridges was no longer just a grassroots movement. It had blossomed into a beacon for seniors across the country, a living testament to the idea that age was not an end but a launching pad for new dreams. Helen had faced shadows of doubt, grief, and fear, but she'd met each with courage, learning that vulnerability was strength and that transformation was always possible, even at 77. She recalled one of her favorite Elon Musk quotes: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That mindset had fueled her leap of faith time and again, turning obstacles into opportunities and silence into stories. Now, as Helen prepared to host the first National Bridges Summit, bringing together seniors, activists, policymakers, and young allies, she felt the full circle of her journey. This was no longer just about survival or rediscovery, it was about legacy, leadership, and lasting impact. Guests from all over the country were arriving, each bringing their own stories of struggle and triumph, ready to share, learn, and build together. The summit venue buzzed with energy, the hum of conversations, the clatter of coffee cups, the exchange of warm greetings and eager anticipation. Helen moved among the crowd with grace and warmth, greeting old friends and meeting new faces. Each handshake, each smile, reinforced the power of community she had long championed. During her opening address, Helen spoke with a voice steady yet filled with passion. She reflected on her personal journey, the losses, the doubts, the unexpected gifts that had shaped her, and invited everyone to embrace the possibility of new beginnings at every stage of life. She challenged the audience to reject society's narratives that labeled aging as decline and invisibility. Instead, she urged them to see aging as a time of innovation, contribution, and joy. The response was electric. Tears, laughter, and standing ovations filled the room. Workshops and panels explored topics ranging from technology and healthcare to creative arts and intergenerational dialogue. Stories from participants revealed the multifaceted beauty of aging, strength in vulnerability, wisdom in experience, and boundless capacity for growth. One particularly moving moment came when Helen invited Carlos on stage. The young musician shared how Bridges had helped him reconnect with his roots and inspired him to pursue his dreams fearlessly. His music filled the hall with energy and hope, a symbol of the bridges between generations that Helen had always envisioned. As the summit drew to a close, Helen found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The woman who once sat alone by a window, consumed by doubt and loneliness, was now a leader of a movement that celebrated life in all its complexity and beauty. She understood that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to arise, but she felt ready. Stronger. Alive. At the end of the final day, Helen stood outside the venue, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. She felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a lightness born of purpose and belonging. Her phone buzzed, a message from her daughter, Susan, with a photo of her grandchildren smiling and a simple text: "We're so proud of you, Mom. Keep shining." Helen smiled, tears of joy welling up. She whispered to the fading light, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." In that moment, Helen knew she had found her new beginning, not in some distant future, but here, now, in the fullness of her life. She was ready to keep building, loving, and inspiring, one bridge at a time. Because at 77, Helen had discovered the greatest truth of all: it's never too late to try again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?